What's good, YouTube? Welcome back. Thank you for clicking onto this reaction. I hope you're looking forward to it just as much as I am. If you haven't already, head over to the content creators page. That link is in the description box down below. If you haven't already and you're enjoying our content, you know what you need to do. You need to like, comment, subscribe, hit that notification bell, but we're going to jump straight into this one. Do the Battle of Talas part 1 and most likely do the second one as well. So let's jump straight into it.
As the summer sun rose above the flat expanses of northern Transoxiana, figures appeared on the road, silhouetted against the morning sky.
How's the audio as well, guys?
The
The desktop audio and that.
As the armies of the Abbasid Caliphate and the Tang Empire of China marched along the banks of the Talas River. What started as a frontier dispute escalated into a regional conflict that will now be decided on the battlefield nearby.
Okay.
War was to come, and now it was here. And as a fan of our channel, you should definitely check out our friends over at CuriosityStream, my personal favorite streaming.
You're correct to lie. It does look like it's the Muslims versus the Chinese, so this will be very interesting and probably are correct, another turning point in history. I'm looking forward to it. Let's see.
Following the death of Prophet Muhammad, the swiftness of the Arab conquest was nothing short of astonishing. In less than 2 decades...
It was astonishing indeed. It was very interesting to find out about the Muslim conquest and just some Muslim history in general. It was just something I was very unaware of.
The Eastern Roman Empire was deprived of its lands in the Middle East, and the Sasanian Empire was conquered entirely. But further afield, Central Asia was much harder to subdue, then settled by sedentary Iranian peoples, divided into a number of small kingdoms, principalities and city-states, as well as Turkic tribes roaming the steppes and the expanses between urban centers. Instead of fighting a single enemy, the Arab armies had to reduce the petty states one by one, facing determined resistance and contending with frequent revolts and setbacks over the next 50 years. By then, caliphal rule had passed on to the Umayyad dynasty, which saw the appointment of Qutayba ibn Muslim as governor of Khorasan, an excellent administrator and military commander who was able to make significant inroads, and through clever policies of recruiting local Iranians into his army, as well as integrating some of the petty rulers into the power structure of the caliphate, he was able to greatly pacify the region of which Transoxiana was of greatest importance. These were some of the wealthiest lands in the world during medieval times, thanks to extensive trade with China, mostly in silk and jade, and with Europe in goods such as amber, furs, honey, and walrus ivory.
Was it just because they got to trade all of those goods as well, or was it because they were able to tax all the goods that sort of went through their lands?
Making Transoxiana one of the most strategically important areas on the planet.
Makes sense.
But with these territorial acquisitions, the Caliphate entered the sphere of interest of the Tang Empire of China. For several centuries, China made its presence felt in Central Asia, and during the reign of Tang Emperor Xianzong, its westward ambitions grew in scale. Xianzong was a diligent and astute ruler who, with the help of his famous 3 chancellors, is credited for bringing Tang China to the pinnacle of culture and power. Most notably, his military reforms saw the replacement of the Fubing system with the Judushi military command. Inefficient, massive conscript armies were replaced by a multicultural, well-drilled volunteer corps.
That's very, very useful. Very useful. Having a professional army is very strong.
Enabling the Tang Empire to assemble a 500,000 strong professional army in just a few years. These reforms were what propelled the Chinese westward push.
I'm very interested in the Chinese history as well, so I'd definitely like to know if there's any good series about anything to do with them. I'd be very, very interested.
Although Tang armies rarely ventured too far west beyond the Tarim Basin, rare military interventions were launched to pacify disloyal petty kings and princes of Central Asia.
Okay.
But it was mostly through strong economic and diplomatic ties that China established a firm foothold in the region, which persisted even after the Umayyad conquest, with numerous city-states continuing to send embassies to China, receiving pompous, mostly symbolic titles from the emperor. This reliance on soft power and the establishment of trade agreements, as well as nominal protectorates and vassalships, enabled the Tang Empire to maintain strong influence in Central Asia without the need for military conquest.
So they just basically got lots of power within and a foothold for that gateway just through diplomatic power. That's very interesting.
This time, the biggest threat to China's westward ambitions was the powerful Tibetan Empire, which successfully challenged the Tang for control over the Tarim Basin, a mostly desert wasteland dotted with strategically important urban towns and cities along the Silk Road.
A lot of that area is like still contested today, right?
The military importance of these urban oases was equally significant, regarded by the Chinese as the gateway to the western regions that the imperial armies could pass through to reach Central Asia. In addition, Turkic Uyghurs to the north also posed a significant threat to Tang interests in this period. But through careful diplomacy, tributes, and Xianzong reforms, by 728 AD, the Chinese managed to establish full control over this vital region.
Very strong.
It was during this time of Tang consolidation in the vast Tarim Basin that the unstoppable Umayyad armies pushed east into Central Asia. The power of the caliphate was such that they were able to overthrow a Chinese-backed Sogdian ruler of the Principality of Fergana and install a puppet regime right on the Tang Empire's doorstep.
All that power and all that control that they were building up is just basically being thrown out of water. That's going to be irritating. So of course this was sort of leading up to this sort of fight. Yeah, this is my first stream. Cheers for dropping in. Hope you enjoy it.
However, Umayyad superiority, rarely challenged before, would meet its match, as the Celestial Empire moved to militarily suppress the Arab expansion.
Okay.
An intervention force of 10,000 troops marched towards the Islamic-controlled Fergana, successfully defeating the Umayyad puppet ruler, before massacring 3 entire Sogdian metropolises as punishment, and restoring the pro-Chinese regime back onto the throne of Fergana.
Oh, it's just a back and forth, just fighting over this like vital point.
The Caliphate responded by allying themselves with the Tibetan Empire and the Turgesh Khaganate.
Okay.
And just a year later, a combined force struck east, aiming to destroy the 4 garrisons of Anshi.
The Tang emperors having to deal with all 3, and also 3 different fronts is the issue, being attacked on 3 different fronts. Oh my, it's just so difficult to deal with.
From where the Tang controlled the Tarim Basin. This invasion, if successful, would have crippled China's westward military ambitions. But the Chinese dealt a massive defeat to the Umayyads at the town of Anshi,
very strong,
almost completely destroying their army. In the aftermath of the battle, Turkish tribes, formerly allied to the Umayyads, switched their allegiance and launched attacks from the north, while the Tang army marched against the Caliphate from the east, effectively expelling the Arabs from Transoxiana.
Ooh.
Never again, the Chinese thought, would the Arabs be able to meddle in the affairs of the Tang dynasty.
They thought that they had just secured their position.
While the Umayyads made limited efforts to re-establish their rule in the lost eastern territories, their main focus shifted west, away from the region, and with this a power vacuum was created that allowed the House of Abbas to slowly build prominence in the remote but important region of Khorasan.
Okay. I
in
see
the ensuing
that region over
decades,
there.
the Abbasids carefully intrigued against the Umayyads, recruiting followers from discontented and dispossessed locals, eventually raising the banner of revolution. The revolt spread quickly under military leadership of Abu Muslim, a commander in the service of the Abbasids, culminating with the victory in the Battle of Zab, which effectively ended Umayyad rule and led to the proclamation of the first Abbasid Caliph. With most of their power base located in Persia, the new regime
now we're all up to date.
shifted their military focus east, recognizing the importance of the phenomenally rich lands of Transoxiana. But the cunning Emperor Xianzong exploited the instability within the Caliphate during the 3 years-long Abbasid Revolution by launching a three-pronged attack. This time, however, the Tang armies were ordered to establish a firm military foothold in Central Asia.
Again, like what I said a couple of videos ago, when a country is going through civil war, and then or an empire is going through a civil war, another outside threatening force puts pressure on it, it's just so difficult to deal with. They're not going to be able to respond for a while. They have to deal with the issues that they've got going on within their own country.
With the Korean general Cao Xianzi in command, the emperor subjugated Tibet's strategically valuable allies, eroding their presence in the area, and vassalized roughly 72 city-states in the important mountainous regions of the Pamir and Hindu Kush. With these developments, the Chinese now directly challenged the Abbasids for control over Central Asia. In the turmoil, what triggered the conflict between the two empires was a local dispute between the petty kingdoms of Fergana and Shash.
Nah, I think it was a lot more to do with the strategic points of both, of the area in general. And both places were getting so big that, and it was inevitable for them to come into contact and come into blows, so that they could find out which one was the dominant force. Any two great powers or big regions are going to do that, to find out who is the more likely to be dominant.
The king of Fergana, having been under heavy Chinese influence for the past 35 years, asked his overlords for assistance. Cao heeded their cries for help and moved to subjugate the Shishin kingdom. The capital city was besieged, and the Tang general promised its king safe passage. But once the king accepted surrender and left the safety of his city walls, he was treacherously captured and beheaded.
Oh, maybe I just spoke before I actually knew what happened.
His son, however, escaped and managed to get word to the Abbasid governor of Khorasan, asking for military assistance. Sensing an
I spoke before I knew what happened.
Opportunity to gather their forces and diminish Tang influence, the Abbasids mustered their troops and marched out of Merv. On the way, reinforcements from
Oh yeah, I guess you are right. This is just a spark that sort of caused the inevitable conflict.
Parts of Turkestan that were still under the Caliphate's control were summoned to join the main army. As they approached Samarkand, Ziyad ibn Salah, a former Umayyad governor of Kufa, joined with his contingent and assumed command of the whole army, continuing the march east, determined to restore Islamic power long bereft to the steppes of Central Asia.
I guess we should just jump straight into it, shouldn't we? Coming in, part 2.
Today's video is sponsored by NordVPN.
Oh, we don't need this ad, do we?
An extra.
Okay, what happens? Let's go.
The two armies lined up on the flat plain next to the river Talas, not far from the city bearing the same name. Accounts of the battle differ greatly, but according to the most consistent estimates by modern scholars, Ziyad commanded up to 40,000 troops. He placed archers in the front, with several rows of spearmen just behind, and a mix of heavy and light cavalry on each flank, as well as a contingent of light cavalry, along with his own heavily armored bodyguard contingent in reserve.
Okay. Very interesting setup.
Meanwhile, Cao took to the field with 30,000 troops. He mirrored the Abbasid formation, with his crossbowmen in the front, mixed with regular archers, supported by heavily armored Tang spearmen in the center, and nomadic mercenary horsemen on each flank, while the Fergana contingent and his own bodyguards were further back.
It's interesting about the crossbows, because obviously the difference between having all just bows and men with bows and crossbows is going to be interesting.
Just circled above, the two commanders cautiously contemplated their moves. What happened next is a matter of debate, but according to one account, Cao ordered his projectile division forward to probe for weaknesses in the Abbasid line. Ziyad responded, and a brief exchange of projectiles followed.
Okay.
Thanks to superior missile technology, Tang crossbowmen soon prevailed, and the Abbasid archers were forced back. Cao promptly ordered his spearmen forward. The Tang commander relied, not for the first time, on the Empire's well-drilled professional troops.
Okay.
The trees rattled as the
He's a bit brave sending their men in first. They're outnumbered as well, aren't they?
disciplined Chinese heavy infantry rumbled forward in unison, packed in a tight formation. Close behind, mounted mercenaries followed in support of the infantry. Ziyad
Mounted mercenaries.
moved his numerically superior infantry forward, hoping to slow down the enemy's advance and give his own cavalry more room to maneuver.
Yep, makes sense.
As the gap closed, the troops in either line gripped their weapons and braced for impact. As the opposing armies interlocked, hacking and stabbing at each other, the scent of blood quickly filled the air.
It's just so crazy to imagine the fighting. Imagine being in just a circle of death and just mud, death, panic and chaos. That's all a fighting pit is.
Cao signaled his cavalry on the flanks to gallop forward and encircle the Abbasid infantry. Ziyad immediately sent his heavy and light cavalry divisions forward to alleviate the pressure on his infantry and repel the Chinese advance. In the center, the better armored Tang spearmen pushed their counterparts back, their packed formation proving effective against the Abbasid footmen.
Okay, very nice.
On the flanks, Ziyad's heavier cavalry stopped the nomadic horsemen in their tracks, but Cao's mercenaries held strong in the face of an assault from a superior enemy force.
Ooh, okay. How is this going to get flipped, or what's going to happen here? Very interesting.
The governor of Samarkand then sent his reserves forward, aiming to break the stalemate. He ordered his cavalry to aim for the immediate flanks of the Chinese infantry.
Yeah, that little gap that's opening.
But Cao, meanwhile, moved his own reserve up the field, negating the efforts of his opponent.
Ooh, this Gao is looking interesting.
Both armies matched each other's strength, and neither would waver.
Nice.
Tiredness, however, was what eventually forced the two commanders to withdraw and rest their troops. A similar stalemate continued for 2 more days, with sporadic skirmishes and head-on clashes, but neither side was able to make any significant gains. The other account of the battle, however, claims that the two armies stood in battle formations for 4 days without engaging each other. Perhaps neither side wanted to risk losing their army, aware that it would take a while to get reinforcements in this remote frontier region.
I was not thinking about that either. That is a smart point by both of these people.
But, perhaps unbeknownst to Cao, prior to the battle, Ziad had established contact with a contingent from one of the Turkic Karluk tribes, living in the steppes further east, recruiting them into his ranks. As small groups of riders trickled in for a couple of days, the Muslim commander concealed them in the tall grass across the Talas River. Then, on the 5th day of the battle, Ziad knew he was ready. He ordered his archers and spearmen forward, with cavalry following close behind.
We see how it's gonna go.
The Abbasids advanced at a strong pace, while Cao had his troops slowly move forward into position. Projectile contingents of the two armies began exchanging volleys of...
But they didn't stop. Like, they didn't let the skirmishers do a little bit of fighting before they sent the troops up, the footmen. It seems like they sent the footmen up straight away as well.
Arrows, with the Chinese getting the better of their Muslim counterparts. The earth groaned as the mass of Abbasid troops moved forward to meet the enemy head-on. As the infantry in the center clashed, cavalry divisions on the flanks widened their lines, trying to outflank each other.
Okay.
Soon, however, the Abbasid cavalry managed to force the Chinese mounted troops into a brutal static melee, as Cao's nomadic mercenaries couldn't feign retreat without exposing the flanks of the infantry in the center. "Now is the time!" Ziad cried out, signaling the Karluk mercenaries to attack.
And at that point, it was all over, really, weren't it?
Emerging from the reeds, the nomadic riders galloped forward. A handful of Tang officers spotted the enemy on their flank, but with nearly all of their troops engaged, they desperately tried to form a line with men from their own retinues.
They just had no chance.
Moments later, arrows from the east started whizzing overhead. With the Talas River behind them, the Karluk horsemen charged headlong into Cao's flank. The morale of the Tang troops on the left broke, and many tried to flee, fearing an encirclement.
Oh, that's the biggest problem. Like, is just your troops, like, just getting scared and running away, and which is understandable, because you like, it's fight or flight. Save your own life. When you think it's all going bad, you've got to save your own life at the end of the day. But yeah, it is scary to think that your squad could stay there till the very end and everyone else is gone. Yeah, leadership and morale is just so important in fights. You see it so many times throughout history where you would have thought a certain army would win, but they get demoralized, and that is it. They have to retreat, and it all goes bad. But Gao definitely fought well. I think he definitely fought well. He just yeah, I agree. Like, it just didn't look like he had enough men to sort of stop him from actually. He didn't have enough men to stop the attack and stop the yeah.
Ziad urged his men on, not wanting to allow the enemy to escape. The governor of Samarkand outwitted the Tang commander, and now the Chinese troops began falling in their thousands as the Abbasid army scythed through their formations. With very few survivors left, Cao ordered a retreat. However, Chinese sources contest this outcome, claiming that it was not Zaid's superior diplomacy and tactics that won the day. Rather, the Tang account of the battle claims that the Karluk mercenaries were not across the river, but were in fact under Cao's command, laying blame on them for the defeat, after they treacherously switched sides mid-battle and attacked from both flanks. If this were true, Cao's 10,000 infantry made up only a third of the Tang army, and would stand no chance against 20,000 Karluks.
Okay.
But in actuality, it's most likely that both the Tang army and the Abbasids had contingents of Karluks in their ranks, and that Ziyad managed to launch a surprise attack on the last day of the battle.
That's it's interesting to know that it's contested. I'd like to know what you guys think. Which one is more likely the case?
Whatever the case, of the 30,000 Tang troops that fought at Talas, only a small percentage survived.
How much is that small percentage though? That's the question.
In the aftermath of the Battle of Talas...
Like, what's the small percentage? Because that's different to everyone. Some people consider 30% a small percentage. Some people 25, some people 20, some people only 5. What is a small percentage? I'm now interested.
The significance of its outcome was not immediately clear. Strategically speaking, the battle was a tactical draw. Cao's plans for a renewed invasion never came to fruition, since the Tang Empire temporarily withdrew most of their troops east to deal with growing unrest in the north and south of the country, as well as Tibetan incursions that put further pressure on the empire.
Once again, inside revolt is just so critical. So critical.
Meanwhile, the eastern expansion of the caliphate was halted. While the Abbasids could have theoretically pressed their advantage after such a crushing victory, at that time their supply lines were still not fully established, thus sending a large army east would not have been a prudent move.
Also, like, you would then have to be able to you would have to then basically make it so that you'd have to rebuild those settlements to fit within your society, recreate provinces, and all of that takes funds, time, and they just didn't have the ability to do that. And then also you have to worry about keeping those areas protected for future references. It's just a bit too difficult sometimes.
As a result, the Abbasid-Chinese border stabilized.
Makes sense.
But the Battle of Talas seems to have gone largely unnoticed by contemporary Chinese and Abbasid chroniclers. Nevertheless, it had important consequences. The Chinese Empire was no longer in any position to interfere in Central Asia, which meant that, in the wake of their victory, the Abbasids were there to stay. And while the Turkic and Persian population of Central Asia certainly did not convert to Islam right after the battle in 751, by driving out the Chinese, there was no longer a counterweight to the Muslim presence, which allowed the Abbasids to gradually spread their influence across the deserts, mountains, and steppes of the region. Within the next 250 years, most of the formerly Buddhist, Hindu, Zoroastrian, and Nestorian Christian tribes of Central Asia had all become Muslim. But perhaps most significant of all, among the prisoners captured after the battle were Chinese artisans, skilled in the art of papermaking.
Oh,
Soon,
okay.
paper mills appeared in Muslim urban centers across the Middle East. And over the coming centuries, the technology spread to Europe as well, fueling advances in science and theology.
So many little things like this are just not told. Like I knew that obviously Middle Eastern culture was a big spread for knowledge and advancements and so on and so forth within our culture in the West. I knew that, but I didn't know that they got the printing press from the Chinese well, they got the information of the printing press from the Chinese at this point in time. It just shows you that the meeting of all these different cultures was so integral to how it then developed the rest of our worlds and the rest of the nation within our worlds. It's just so interesting. But history is just so fascinating for that reason. Seeing how all these cultures interacting with each other just cause so many different rippling effects. It's just so interesting.
And
it's just, yeah.
With the promotion of commerce, industry, and the arts, the prestige of the Caliphate would spread across the known world under the banner of the Abbasids. Credit goes to our awesome patrons who make videos like this one possible.
That was a good good double episode. I thoroughly enjoyed it. So glad I started it. If you haven't already, head over to HistoryMarche's channel. That link will be in the original video, the edited videos description box down below.